Good morning, everyone. Morning. I'm Jonathan Overpeck. I'm the Dean of the School for Environment and Sustainability at the University of Michigan. And I want to thank everyone for coming to join in a conversation today about accelerating the path of the state of Michigan to a clean energy future. I want to also welcome our special guest from the great state of Washington, from the great clean energy state of Washington, Governor Jay Inslee. Thank you for coming. And I want to thank all of our other panelists, who I'll introduce in just a second. But before we get started in today's program and introducing the rest of the panel, I want to take a little time out to remember and reflect on what's happened this weekend in Pittsburgh and the terrible events that took place there. You've probably seen the statements, at least if you're on campus, that the president of the university, Mark Slissel, has sent out. We echo his sentiments of shock and sadness and disbelief. And there's simply no room for those despicable acts of hate and violence. At SEAS, we hold diversity, inclusion, and equity at the top of everything we do. And as a community, as a university, we have to stand together against hate. Let's just start this morning, please, with a moment of silence for the victims and their loved ones, for the Jewish community, for the city of Pittsburgh, and for all those feeling the impacts of this senseless acts of hate. Thank you. I guess I'm a little more affected than I expected. We'll continue to have discussions like this about all the important issues that are going on in the real world, whether it's trying to snuff out hate, bring people together rather than divide them, or to tackle some of the biggest problems facing humanity, such as climate change and the need to transform our economy to clean energy. So this gathering today is really committed to working together and to really start the ball rolling, not just on the university's campus, but across the boundary between our campus and the community of Michigan and the community of the Great Lakes, between businesses and civil groups, between NGOs and communities. We all have to work together to get where we need to go. And in this case, it's one of the biggest, most wicked problems facing our humankind, and that's why we're here today. We're pleased to support the Students for Clean Energy. There are many of them in the room, and we have a representative here on the panel, and the Michigan League of Conservation Voters in hosting this event today. So thank you. In light of our new initiative on campus to accelerate both the university and community's path towards clean energy and carbon neutrality, we want to brainstorm and start brainstorming today just how we're going to do that, how we're going to bring people together, how we're going to work the politics, how we're going to work the economics. And so it's with this goal in mind that we're so lucky to have Governor Inslee with us and these other panelists to have a discussion. So what I'd like to do first here is just give really super brief introductions to our panelists. And then they're going to each give a brief statement to get the ball rolling, and then I'll be asking some questions, and then we'll be able to open the floor to questions. And we promised not to talk about politics today. It's a tough time in the election cycle to have an event like this, but we really just want to focus on how we're going to work together towards moving forward. So our guest of honor, as I've already said, is Governor Jay Inslee, Governor of the state of Michigan. We also have Chris Taylor, Michigan.
Yeah.
Did I do that? We're lucky I didn't say Arizona. Unfortunately, they're not all interchangeable. I'm sorry. The state of Washington. Okay, and Chris Taylor is the mayor of Tucson. No, Ann Arbor. It's wonderful to have Mayor Taylor with us today. Guy Williams came from Detroit this morning. He's President and CEO of Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice, and he's also principal and founder of the Geo Williams and Associates. And he's served the university in many capacities, and as an external advisory board and as a close partner. And he's also includes being on our board for the Center for Sustainable Systems here in the School of Seas. Lisa Wozniak, I've just met her a couple weeks ago, and I'm just amazed at the energy she brings to everything in Michigan, and particularly environmental. She is the executive director of the Michigan League of Conservation Voters. Welcome. And Jack Hu is the vice president for research at the University of Michigan. He's in part standing in for Mark Slissel, our president, who's in Detroit today. But Jack is also instrumental in bringing the incredible wealth and power of University of Michigan's research to this problem we're going to be talking about today. And he himself has been involved in a lot of that research. And finally, the best for last, one of the impetuses for this meeting are our students. Grant Faber is president of the Students for Clean Energy. He's a senior at the Ross School of Business with a minor in environmental science, and today he told me he wants to come to grad school and see. So we're really pleased to have you join us. Okay. As I've said, each will give a brief overview of what they are doing to advance clean energy in the space they work in and live in. Then I'll ask some questions, then we'll open up the floor. So let's begin with our guest of honor, Governor of Washington, Jay Inslee.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, I think sitting is just fine. Can you see us from the back, or would you like us to stand?
You see enough of me. That's great.
Yeah.
This is a real delight. Trudy and I are here. We are delighted to be here. I come from the state of Washington with a spirit of optimism, the spirit that we are both can-do states, that we know how to get this job done, that we have to get this job done, and we will get this job done. So that's my fundamental message today, and I want to tell you why I'm optimistic in our ability to save our small little blue planet from the cataclysm of climate change while building our economies. I want to tell you why I'm optimistic. Number one, we've got the smartest generation in the history of the United States, and a lot of them are students right here at Michigan. Can we give a round of applause for Grant's leadership and leading the generation? Thanks for what you're doing. I'm serious. If you can find a climate change denier on this campus, it's going to be very, very difficult to find them. And if you do, they'll have to be re-educated. But in any event, this is a generation who gets it. We have both the energy technologically and politically to get this job done with this generation coming up. Number two, we have to realize the capability and the enormous untapped potential of the American economy to produce clean energy products, services, and jobs. Now, I was reminded of this driving up here this morning. I drove by Willow Run. I've never been in this area before, and we saw the exit for Willow Run. So I Googled it. I knew a little bit about it and learned that in World War II, in about 3.5 to 4 years, they made 18,000 B-24s. They were turning out giant 4-engine bombers every 63 minutes in Willow Run. That is what the people of Michigan are capable of doing when we have a national commitment to actually get something done. Now imagine Michigan with a Willow Run turning out solar panels and wind turbine blades and new energy systems and new bonding systems that Jack is developing so we can reduce the weight of our cars by 50 or 60% and thereby save energy. Imagine that world, and you can understand what the difference it will make to the planet and our economies. And we are capable of doing this in the clean energy space, and I know this because we've done it. We've seen it. We saw it at Willow Run. Third reason is the technological advances are so profound at a rate that we've never imagined before. I co-authored a book about 10 years ago, and basically that within 10 years solar power would be commercially viable, and wind power would be below the cost of coal in some places. I was wrong. it has actually happened much quicker. The cost of solar power has come down about 80% in the last 10 years and continues to decline. It is now becoming commercially viable and competitive grid scale in various places in the world. So those are three reasons to be optimistic about our ability to build a clean energy economy. Now, in our state, we're doing it. We're hustling it. I'm proud that the largest manufacturer of composites that goes into electric cars in the Western Hemisphere is a little town called Moses Lake, Washington. I'm proud that the biggest manufacturer of polysilicate for solar panels in the Western Hemisphere is in Moses Lake, Washington. We're growing jobs twice as fast in the clean energy economy than we are in the best economy in the United States, which is the state of Washington. And what we have learned is when you focus on clean energy, not only will it not retard your economic growth, it will grow your economy. We have the fastest growing economy in the United States, in part because of our emphasis on clean energy. So we've done several things. I'll mention them real quickly. One, a robust renewable portfolio standard adopted by popular vote in the state of Washington. Two, a good incentive program to incentivize and help people get access to electric cars. Three, an incentive program to help find a financing system for solar power. And I was really happy, Trudy and I got to go to cut the ribbons in a little town called Lynn, Washington, with 170 acres of solar panels amongst the wheat fields. And how we used to do solar energy is turn it into wheat. Now we're turning it into electricity directly. It's kind of a new form of photosynthesis, and it works really, really well. We've developed the best building codes in the United States to reduce energy wastage. I've adopted a economy-wide cap on carbon dioxide. There was a somewhat misguided decision by a lower court judge putting that on ice for the moment, but we hope that will be repaired at our Supreme Court. And a week from tomorrow, we will have a chance to vote on America's first carbon fee, to put a fee on carbon pollution. Woo! It is time to end the monopoly of carbon pollution in unlimited amounts at zero cost, which is the largest externality in world history. And we hope that we can end that Tuesday, and if we don't, we'll be back in the legislature working on a lot of other things. So I want to thank you for your energy here, and thanks for ability to expound, and I look forward to your easy questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It sounds like we have a roadmap. We should just get out there and do it. But, of course, there's the local reality, and Mayor Taylor will help us understand that.
Well, thank you very much. And again, for me too, it is a great pleasure to be here today. You know, questions of sustainability, questions of environmental diligence are key to life in Ann Arbor. They are among our core values, and it's a pleasure to be with you today to talk with you about what we're doing here in the city. You know, it's wonderful and inspiring to hear strategic actions that can be taken, and inspirational to hear strategic actions that can be taken. At the municipal level, we tend to be a little more tactical. Our scope is a little smaller. Our abilities are a little smaller, both in terms of resources and in terms of legal ability. And so, you know, we in Ann Arbor, what we have is our climate action plan, and our climate action plan is detailed, it is forward-looking, and it is practical. We have lots of things that we are planning on doing, that we are finding the resources to go forward and do. We have goals of improving our electric vehicles infrastructure. When we are working on our downtown parking structures, when we're working on our downtown meters, we're making sure that going forward that we look forward to a future where electronic vehicles are the order of the day. We have affordable housing units that the city owns and operates, our public housing in Ann Arbor. And we understand that affordability and sustainability go hand in hand, that the justice of providing high-quality, affordable housing to people extends to providing housing that is ultimately net zero. We achieve that through improving energy efficiency. We achieve that through on-site energy creation and production. We have also goals where we want Ann Arbor to be a place where developments can be realized, can be visioned with sustainability in mind. Out on Platte Road, where the old Juvenile Justice Center used to be, right next to County Farm Park, there's a proposal for a development that includes sustainability from the ground up. Plans to have mixed income affordability with market rate housing, resiliency hubs, and solar optimized grids with storage planned into the project. These are things that we're able to do, that we're able to envision. We're hoping to get cooperation with utilities to achieve the goal. Further, we know at the city that our municipal operations, again, speaking of tactics and strategy, our goal with respect to municipal operations is, of course, to drop ourselves down to 100% renewable energy by 2035. But we know, too, that we are only a small part of what goes on here in the city of Ann Arbor. A great deal of it is the university, a great deal of it is a transportation infrastructure, and of course, our residents are, also have a tremendous role to play. And so, with our climate action plan, our goal is to push out energy efficiency solutions to residents, to help seniors age in place, to help people themselves improve solar generation on site. These are some of the things that the city of Ann Arbor seeks to do, strives to do, because fundamentally we know that in the without getting political, truly, in the absence of unanimity with respect to the vision that you see in Washington State, the improvements with respect to sustainability, the on-the-ground action, so much of that needs to come from the local level. And so we in Ann Arbor at City Hall are committed to moving this forward, and I ultimately believe that the residents of Ann Arbor are behind us in this. And so I'm hoping that we're gonna take the next step and keep on going.
We're with you.
Thank you. We're with you.
You helped us get there, we'll help you get there.
All right, it's a deal.
Yeah. Okay, Guy Williams, tell us a little about Detroit. What you been doing?
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Can you hear me okay? They always tell me my voice is too soft for these things. First of all, I just want to say I'm very excited to be here. I'm grateful to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for rising me today and helping me show up. I bring greetings from Detroiters working for environmental justice, and I want to take a minute. Maybe some of you have a handout that looks like this. I'm not sure I had enough for everyone, but it's a copy of the Principles of Environmental Justice, and it is the primary source document and guiding constitution, if you will, for our environmental justice movement in the United States primarily, but also beyond. And things that are articulated there are the what's up and what's our vision. Just a little history, personal history, I was blessed to be part of drafting this document. I'm not sure why I'm going in and out, but drafting this document back in the early 90s, and there was 600 people aggregated to ratify this document. Can you imagine 600 people agreeing face to face on something with 17 principles? I mean, think about that for a second. It's very powerful. And there's been no movement to modify, add, take away from this document. And I want to draw your attention to a couple key concepts here that are relevant for our topic today. Right off the bat, the first principle highlights the interdependence of all species. That's a no-brainer, especially here in the Dana building. We all know that. Number 5, which gets more to the topic of the day and next Tuesday, environmental justice affirms the fundamental right to political, economic, cultural, and environmental self-determination. So here in a state where our democracy was stripped away from thousands of citizens, tens of thousands of citizens, actually hundreds of thousands of citizens, by our emergency manager system, that had a ripple effect that's still playing out today in our water crisis in cities like Detroit and Flint, which are literally linked together. They're more than interdependent. We're literally linked together. I have 1 minute. So I'm going to whip forward and say, number 7, we demand the right to participate as equal partners. And so what's really up for DWJ these days is we're the original environmental justice group in Michigan. We organized in 1994. We aggregate power amongst our colleague organizations. The most relevant fruit of our work is the Detroit Climate Action Plan. And something noteworthy is that we aggregated business and institutions. They agreed on 80% reductions by 2050 in their carbon emissions from baseline 2012 numbers, starting out with a 10% reduction by 2022. So, I think this whole theme about when we put our minds collectively together, that is the key. And beyond that key, it's which minds are we pulling together? I'd be very remiss if I didn't shout out to my colleagues and our organizational partnerships that are long-standing here at the university with the Detroit Urban Research Center out of the School of Public Health. And as mentioned earlier, the Center for Sustainable Systems here in the Dana Building. Both of these organizations have helped bring primary research and practical engagement to the work of Detroit and the citizens of Detroit. Lastly, one primary piece of research that we now know in the Detroit area, due to air pollution-related illnesses, 2 to 3 people a day are dying, flat out. We don't know who it's going to be today, but we know there's going to be a few of us lost because the air is not clean. And as my friend Emma Lockridge in Southwest Detroit says, we're stuck on stupid as a society. We know better now how to do it, and we need to get on with it.
Thank you. Lisa.
My name is Lisa Wozniak. I run the Michigan League of Conservation Voters here in the state, and I'll tell you a little bit about our work. But first I want to say thank you to Guy and to all the panelists here. And I also want to do a little bit of shout out to Bunyan Bryant, who, if it were not for his teaching and for his great leadership in the space of environmental justice, I would not probably be doing the work that I'm doing. And so I know that both Guy and I have a lot of connections back to Bunyan. So I have the great privilege of running an organization that describes itself as being the leading nonpartisan political voice, and yes, the word politics does come in. I will refrain from deep politics here. Environmental political voice in Michigan. We work to protect our air, our land, our water, our Great Lakes, and address the threat, the global threat of climate change. I believe that states at this point matter more than ever before. What we see happening in Washington, D.C., in rolling back all of the progress that has been made, is basically a fire under all of us to do more and more at the state and local level. We have been working very hard in this space for many years. We were very active in what was unfortunately a failed ballot initiative in 2012 that would have moved our state to a 25% by 2025 renewable energy standard. With that, though, came a lot of energy to continue to move the dial on this. And so we have been working over the last many years, and I will tell you that with the help of people in this room, I see a few friends, Mike Garfield, Mike Schreiberg. Collectively, the environmental and conservation community came together, and in lame duck in 2016, were able to actually pass clean energy legislation in a completely Republican-controlled environment. And no one, I think, across this country thought that would be possible. Since that time, we've continued to work on these issues, and I can tell you more about those details if you like, but including how that deal actually got made in the lame duck session. But this is a critical focus of environmental organizations across the state, certainly in terms of what we learned from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate and the announcement that if we don't get moving quickly, we're all in deep, deep, deep trouble. So I can tell you that citizens across the state are more engaged than ever before. They see the link directly between climate change and water. And if you can't find that connection here in a state that's surrounded by the Great Lakes, you probably can't find it anywhere. But people see that, and they're ready to take action on everything from direct action on energy and policies in Lansing and dealing with things like the Enbridge Line 5 pipeline, frankly, that is moving tar sands oil through the most precarious part of our Great Lakes for reasons that do not benefit any of us, and certainly not the state of Michigan. So happy to talk more about all of this, but thank you for having me today.
Jack.
Thank you, Peck. Thank you, Grant and Lisa, for bringing us together. It's great to have you, the governor. So my job as the vice president for research is to build research programs on campus and then support the faculty and students who are doing research. So Michigan actually is the largest public research university. We have 19 different schools and colleges. My estimate is we have close to 800 faculty members who are interested in or doing research in energy and sustainability. So those are in the different schools, not just Cs, but policy, engineering, the natural sciences, and so on. So I think that broad excellence is a top priority for me in terms of building research initiatives, right? So bring faculty together from the different disciplines and then build research initiatives to address the challenges of today and tomorrow. So a number of things that are relevant to the topic today. So we have the University of Michigan Energy Institute. We have the Grand Sustainability Institute. So those are directly focused on energy and sustainability. We also built a mobility transformation initiative. So that's MCD. It's a public-private partnership where we brought the state and then more than 65 companies. Of course, the University of Michigan invests in MCD. The governor mentioned Willow Run. Actually, we converted Willow Run to a new mobility center. So ACM, the American Center for Mobility, is now a 350-acre testing site for connected and automated vehicles. Transportation consumes more than 1/3 of the energy that we use. I think 72% of the petroleum are used for transportation. So changing the way how we move people and goods, I think will contribute to reduced consumption of energy, reduced emission, and then improved environmental impact and benefit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One of our sponsors.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. So I faced a dilemma when I came to this event this morning. So shortly, I have an ethics course starting, and I feel like a very bad person when I skip ethics. But I think there's something interesting here that I had to face a trade-off. And I had to face a trade-off between two things, both of which I really wanted to do. I mean, of course, you could argue this is more applied ethics and maybe more important, but as I talk, maybe I think it's important to think about that idea of trade-offs and trading off maybe climate action and short-term financial gain. I hope that's not too forced of an analogy. So I'm the president of Students for Clean Energy. We've been on campus for a little over 6 years. We essentially advocate for the university to switch to 100% clean energy. We're trying to start with electricity and then moving on from there. So we do so through environmental career advising of our members. I mean, I guess that's more of an ancillary activity that we engage in. But we also do many research projects. We try to do some on-campus projects. You may have seen the solar canopies with distributed energy batteries. We do a yearly trip to West Virginia to learn about coal mining. We do wind farm tours and multiple other types of educational events. And so I guess how I kind of got propelled into this whole world of like university level clean energy activism was that a few summers ago I interned at an interlocal government agency that advises local municipalities on clean energy options. And there I learned about third-party ownership and specifically power purchase agreements. And so when I got back to campus in the fall, I said, why shouldn't U of M do a power purchase agreement? The university was a little bit resistant towards solar on many of our buildings. They told us Washtenaw County is no good for wind, so it just didn't make sense to really do it on campus, they told us. And so we said, we could look into doing a power purchase agreement, engaging with DTE or another third-party developer and doing some kind of development off campus, which U of M could take credit for. And so I formed a small research team with some people from Students for Clean Energy, and we started researching it. And then we met up with the Energy Institute and Professor Adam Simon, who's in the front row here, who sponsor the Clean Wolverines, which is a small group of students who do research projects essentially advocating for U of M to go 100% clean. And so we did the research. We found some good stuff. We presented it at the Toward Carbon Neutrality Conference in April, which was a very important step to our recent commitment, I'll say, for carbon neutrality at U of M. And yeah, and the Clean Wolverines are still working. We're still doing different research projects this year, mostly focusing on energy efficiency. And so I guess I'm excited to continue the dialogue from here.
Thanks, Grant. And thanks all the students who are here. I think there's no doubt that what University of Michigan's embarking on is in big part because of you. And like all of us, we're all going to have to chip in and make it happen. We're almost on schedule, which is wonderful, and I thank the panelists for keeping us there. I'm going to ask a few questions now, and then we'll return and hopefully have some time for the audience to ask some questions as well. I'd like to start with you, Governor, and ask you, what are some of the biggest barriers? Imagine yourself, you're in Michigan now. Not necessarily governor of Michigan, but you're in Michigan. What are some of the barriers you've encountered, and how do you surmount those barriers?
The number one barrier is fear. And like in many things in human endeavors, it is something you got to penetrate and you got to run through and around. Because fear is the real thing we're up against, and it's the fear of an inability to defeat climate change and build a clean energy economy. And that fear comes from pessimism, it comes from short-sightedness, it comes from a lack of imagination, and there is fear that we simply can't defeat climate change because we don't have the brain power and the person power to do it. And that fear needs to be overcome. Climate denial at its root is not because of scientific ignorance. It is because of the fear that we can't actually solve this problem. And the antidote to that is hope and optimism and a shining a light on the great things that we can do to solve this problem. So I spend a lot of my time actually doing that. You look at the work that Jack is doing on this campus, which is stunning. You look at, I was just thinking, I was listening to Jack. He's trying to develop a way to meld aluminum and steel to have a lighter superstructure for our cars so we can save huge energy. And it took me back when I wrote this book 10 years ago, or co-authored this book 10 years ago. I talked about this little company called FiberForge. They were in Colorado, and they were just starting to make these little parts to put in the trunk of your car, where instead of being steel, it would be composite, carbon composite, to reduce the weight. And the part was only about this big, but I kind of had the theory that, why don't we make the whole car out of this composite? Well, today, the BMW i3, that carbon is spun in Moses Lake, Washington. I mentioned this. We had hundreds of people spinning carbon to do that. That happened just in 10 years. That technology went from the seed of an idea to a commercial enterprise within 10 years. And so I think fear is our opponent, and we got to show people cause for optimism.
Sounds good. You're also the co-founder and co-chair of the U.S. Climate Alliance, a bipartisan coalition of states that's formed to uphold meeting the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. And as you put together that coalition, how did you ensure that while we push for clean energy, we also end up with a more just society?
Well, we have embedded environmental justice in what we have done, and that's very important, both from a fairness standpoint and from a political standpoint. I'll just give you an example. So in the initiative that's on the ballot a week from tomorrow, there is a provision that's basically a polluter pays provision. The polluters would have to pay $15 a ton for the carbon dioxide pollution they put in the air. And that generates about $1 billion a biennium of dollars to help people acquire clean energy. But also in this is a provision that recycles that money back to low-income people to cushion any energy cost increases that occur. So we've embedded an environmental justice part in the policy. When we think about transportation, we think about, and we've got $70 billion of transportation infrastructure in progress in Washington where they can't build a birdhouse in Washington, D.C. right now. And in that, we focus on public transportation to make people get access to clean public transportation. So we think of environmental justice throughout our measures. And by the way, I just want to riff on something Lisa said. We got to understand that we can control our own destinies in our states. We have the ability to do these things in our states, almost no matter what is going on in Washington, D.C. And the rule is Washington, D.C. cannot stop us right now. The president could not stop us from doing a renewable portfolio standard. He could not stop us from starting our Clean Energy Institute at the University of Washington. He can't stop us from having a state-based incentive to help people get electric cars. And that's why we ought to be optimistic, because if we put the people in office who share this value system and this vision, nobody can stop us. Certainly it can't stop Wolverines, and it can't stop Huskies or Cougars. I'm married to a Washington State Cougar, too, so thank you very much.
Thanks. You know, it sounds easy. I think your alliance has Republican leaders in it, too. What would be one word of advice you'd give our students, you'd give everyone else in the room, when they want to work across the partisan divide in this country that we now live in?
Well, number one, what I would say is vote. We need people to vote. We need Wolverines to vote. We need the smartest generation in American history to vote. And I was just talking to Grant and his colleagues about that. That's number one. And frankly, it's easier to get someone in office who shares your values than to get somebody who doesn't share your values and get them to share your values. That's number one. But number two, we are always looking for ways to find commonality of our value system. So when you talk to a person who might be a Republican person who really loves to fish for salmon in the state of Washington, we'll talk a little bit less about the imminent flooding of Bangladesh, which is a threat, and the imminent loss of the entire nation of the Maldives because of sea level rise, but more about the fact that you don't have any salmon to catch, which is true. About 80-90% of our salmon essentially died in the Columbia River. One of our runs, our steelhead, and you just talk about something in their life. And everybody has something in their life that now they treasure, which is going to be adversely affected by climate change. Everybody. Even the memories of having snow on the ground here during Halloween, which is changing in Michigan, I'm told this morning. So you just got to find something that people treasure in their lives and find that commonality.
Great advice. Mayor Taylor, what is on your short list for what the university could do to help the city of Ann Arbor move forward on clean energy? What are the things we could do for you?
That's an excellent question. The short of it is this, I think. The university has talent. The university has resources. The city of Ann Arbor has people on the ground who are seeking solutions, or people on the ground who are in need of solutions. And I think broadly the city of Ann Arbor as a municipal organization and as a community desires to be your test case. We treasure the fact that the university is here, that the creativity is here, that the inspiration is here, that the values are here, and that we are aligned in these things. Folks in the city are always looking for professors, departments, programs to have ideas about what can be done with respect to mobility, what can be done with respect to on-the-ground housing sustainability, with respect to very localized production. So broadly, it's look at the city of Ann Arbor as an opportunity for people to work with you, for an opportunity for people to receive the benefits of your ideas, and be a place where you can test those ideas and see whether they're implementable in the real world.
That makes sense. We like to look at the campus as a real-world laboratory, but not just the campus. If we could start looking at the community and the state of Michigan as our laboratory. Jack, what do you think about, are there ways, you've been doing some amazing things in engineering and for the whole cross-campus research enterprise and trying to bridge between government and private sector and what we do on campus. Are there some low-hanging fruit left where we can accelerate that process to bring more innovation and change in our society?
The answer is yes. So through MCD, for example, we are doing deployments of connected cars and automated cars. I mentioned about transportation as a major contributor to carbon emission. The governor actually was quite interested in my own work as a faculty member, which is lightweighting of automotive structures, right? So why all those things are converging into, I would say, good system solutions. So if cars are connected and automated, they don't crash into each other. And then you can design lighter structures, even though you still have the strength and then performance requirement. But then you can design a structure, and then that is lighter, and the battery will be smaller. So as a result, then safety improves, performance improves, and efficiency improves. So then altogether, it contributes to lower emission. So through MCD, I think we are doing the deployment together with the city, with various testing, and citizens are all participating in our pilot. So I think that's a model, how working with the city together with the city transportation management team. Another area is smart transportation. So right now, I think our traffic control is very rigid, right? You will have traffic signs, red light and green light. They are controlled based on fixed schedules. Sometimes, do you get into problems where on a Sunday night, you are stopped at a red light for 2 minutes, there's no one in front of you, no one in the other direction, and so on. Why don't the light turn green when you are there, for example, right? So how can we make traffic smart so that you don't waste unnecessary fuels in transportation? So I think those are things we can work with the city together to make sure that our infrastructure is smart, and then vehicle-to-infrastructure communications will be available so that we can make the system much more efficient as a whole.
Thanks. Now, Guy, what's your secret sauce for collaboration? As you put together the Detroit Climate Action Plan, how do you bring together these disparate groups to all agree on what we should be doing next? It's sort of how did you bring people together, all those people, to agree on the principles of environmental justice?
Thank you very much for the question. And I want to first speak to how is it that we needed to do it. Detroit's one of the few cities in the country where the Climate Action Plan was developed by an NGO lead rather than government lead. It goes back to the chaos of government I mentioned before and the loss of democracy. Detroit was embroiled in bankruptcy and everything around that at the time we pulled together our colleagues to form the Detroit Climate Action Collaborative. And I want to give a shout out to my colleague, Kimberly Hill-Knott, who had that vision. She went to one of the climate meetings in Copenhagen, I believe, and got inspired with the scale of the international challenge. She came home and she's like, Guy, we've got to do something. We can't wait. And I think to your question, the point is there are a lot of people out there who share that sentiment. And I also believe that it's a great counterpoint to the fear. And I agree with the characterization that there's still way too much fear of the unknown. And we see that in Michigan statewide political setup in our legislature right now. It's a very defensive postured dynamic there. It's not forward-looking in terms of longer-term gain. And I don't know what you do about that other than you just keep trying to aggregate new ideas and be a respected sounding board for these ideas and the possibilities, right? So we held up a vision of possibility that Detroit could move from a pile of chaos to a global leader in a matter of a decade's time. And along with our colleagues, that's starting to gain ground. For example, there's now an Office of Sustainability in the city of Detroit. I'm happy to say DWEJ is working very closely with that office to make sure that all the voices as possible in the city craft our new sustainability plan for the city. So that's going to be rolling out in early 2019. It'll take us a while to catch up to the speed of an Ann Arbor on these themes, yet there's so many people who hold that understanding of the interconnected opportunity, as the professor was just describing, and the need to bring it home in a practical way so that we have a healthier place to live, we have a safer place to live, and a more economically vibrant place to live. So people see that these things are interconnected. So it was fairly easy for us to aggregate that group, the Climate Action Collaborative.
Thanks. And Grant, could you say a little more about collaboration in the student space? Why is it so important for students to be involved in this effort to propel Michigan and the University of Michigan to clean energy? And what are the best ways to bring students together?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of clear and maybe self-evident to most people in the room that climate change is one of the most, or probably, I would say probably one of the two most severe existential risks that humans face right now. So clearly it's an important problem, and we need people who are educated to work on this problem. It makes sense. I think it's also easy to convince young people to take part in climate action because, well, it's going to be us and our eventual spawn, who are going to withstand the worst of this in 40 years' time. So we're very easy to convince, and I think without getting too propagandistic here, I mean, we are students at good universities are the leaders of the future. And, I know this from being at Ross, a lot of my colleagues are extremely driven people. And I mean, sometimes it's, I'll be the first to admit it's not always for the best reasons or for the best ends, but that sort of drive is something I see among many different students. And so it's important to influence, these people who are super driven, super educated, and know that we are going to be facing the worst effects, in some time. And so for all of those reasons, I mean, I think it's really self-evident that we need to train students to take part in this. And to finish off, addressing climate change will require cohesive, collective action. And so naturally, teaching kids how to work together in this kind of living laboratory that is campus, I think is an important skill to have going forward to fight climate change.
Thanks, and we definitely appreciate your push too. Lisa, I have a long question for you. The League of Conservation Voters is currently engaged in a campaign to reject fossil fuels and embrace clean energy by holding states accountable for transitioning to 100% clean energy. The League recently applauded House Bill 6466, legislation sponsored by one of our alums, Representative Youssef Rabi, that would increase Michigan's renewable energy standard to 100% by 2050. Could you just tell us a little about that fight? How do we get the legislation to become reality?
So I'll try and stay within my 3 minutes or whatever it is right now. Let me step back and say that Michigan at one point was a leader across this country in environmental protection. And one of the things that we organizationally have as part of our strategic plan is actually to put this state, with all of its talent, the students being a key portion of that, and the next generation back in the driver's seat. We have so much to offer this national conversation and, frankly, the changes that can be made at the state level. We also believe, in terms of how we do our work, and I'm going to get to the answer to your question, that our theory of change is that starts with whom we elect. Whom we elect matters. And that is said with a nonpartisan, statement. We believe that we need to elect strong leaders, ideally champions like Yousef Rabi, who is an alum of this school. We need to make sure that citizens and those who are running for office are educated. We've done more candidate education this year than we've ever done in our organization's history, because in a term-limited legislature, which Michigan has, a full-time legislature and a term-limited legislature, people run for office who know very, very little about what we're talking about here today. So it's essential to get out in front and actually educate those who are running. And then, frankly, it's really important to hold them accountable. If they do great things like what is happening in Washington State, everyone should be cheering for the governor, and I hope they are, for all of the incredible work that's being done there. And if it's not being done, then darn it, we need to say, you're not holding up, your end of the deal. I will tell you proudly that 77 candidates running for office this year in Michigan have pledged to work towards 100% renewables by 2050. So this gets to the answer to the question. We have legislation that's been introduced to move us towards 100% renewables. We need people in those seats in the legislature who will help to support that. And we need organizations and citizens and students actively engaged in making sure that everyone, Yousef represents this area, which is, it's sort of easy because Washtenaw County, we're supportive of this idea. So many different parts of the state are not there. And so we need to engage citizens all over the state, and they're there. They just need to know that there's a path towards having their voices heard, to making it very clear that this is what we expect of the state legislature. So whether that gets done this year, I don't think so, but turning in 2019, we're going to be making sure that this legislation is taken up and actively moved forward.
Thanks. That sounds like one of our goals. It was interesting, when I was back in Arizona only a little over a year ago, I worked a lot on water there. And as those of you who know the Southwest, the Colorado River, the Rio Grande River, the two biggest rivers in the Southwest, their flows have been declining, in part because of less precipitation, but just as much because of the warming. So the global warming is literally drying up the Southwest United States. And there are all sorts of ideas, besides fighting the cause of the problem, for dealing with the problem. And one of those was, well, let's start looking towards the Mississippi or the Great Lakes to get our water. In Las Vegas, they think big. We could get the water from the Columbia. We could get the water from the Great Lakes. One of the things that really I saw and I reflected upon when I moved here was how fast it was before the states of the Great Lakes, Republicans and Democrats and everyone else in between, decided to have a compact for the Great Lakes that forbid moving water out of the Great Lakes. In other words, I think in the Great Lakes, when the water is threatened, people come together. I think when people want jobs, that's not a partisan issue. We want a strong economy. That's not a partisan. And I think what's happening in Flint and Detroit with water, and our own schools in Ann Arbor, lead in our water. We all have kids. We all want to clean that up. So we have to find these bipartisan tie points to bring us together. With that, I won't say any more. I would like to hear some questions from the audience. Okay, let's start with you first. One of you two. Woman in front, please.
Hi.
Introduce yourself. Please use the microphone.
Thanks.
And say your question.
Okay, thanks, Peck. First of all, thank you to the panel. Thank you, Governor Inslee. This is a fantastic discussion, very inspiring. My name is Melissa Zakzik. I'm the Research and Thought Leadership Manager for the Herb Institute, and we are a partnership between SEAS and the Ross School of Business. And Governor, you mentioned a few examples of business-state collaborations in your state, and I'm really curious to hear you talk a little bit more about that in terms of what is the role that businesses can play and should play in collaborating with the states as they're trying to advance really aggressive carbon goals. Thanks.
Well, we believe in our state that business is absolutely fundamental to the success of this enterprise, because that's the entrepreneurs and the skilled working people are going to really solve this problem. We can help, we can nudge, we can create incentives, but ultimately is business leaders and working people are going to solve this problem. That's our precept number one. So we look for any way we can to help those businesses grow. One of the things we have is a clean energy fund that helps basically some spin-offs that come out of our great labs to help get going across the desert of death, they call it, from some of their financing problems that they have, number one. Number two, we produce skilled people so that those businesses can succeed. And we now are probably the leading state in the development of a career-connected learning program to have apprenticeships so you can get trained in these new skills like in solar energy and wind energy even without having to go to college. And number three, we do provide incentives. Now, this is a difficult discussion. If I can take just a couple seconds on it. Businesses historically have sort of a knee-jerk reaction against any regulatory scheme. It's kind of a instinctual response. Let's take this issue of carbon pollution pricing. A lot of business folks would think that a carbon pollution pricing system is sort of anti-business. I don't believe that. I think it's pro-business in this sense. Right now, we got two business people. Think of two business people in my state. One is building solar panels and installing them, and one is putting out coal-based electricity. We have a system today that is grossly unfair between those two business people, because one of those business people gets an enormous subsidy, which is they get to put their pollution in the air in infinite amounts at zero cost. It is the largest subsidy in world history. The other business person, the solar person, doesn't get that subsidy. And essentially, the solar person, in order to have a level playing field, needs the person who's using up the limited carrying capacity of our atmosphere to have to pay for it. This is a pro-business system to have internalized the cost of what it costs society to be doing your business. So we need to get people to understand that, and I hope we do next Tuesday.
Can I tag on real quick?
Okay, quick.
I wanted to circle back to some of the data that came out of University of Michigan research around the air pollution locally, which is, I mentioned the fatalities earlier, the mortality rate. What I did not mention was the $6 billion drag on the local economy from missed work time for people who are sick but still are living, but they're just not at work, they're not at school. More than 18,000 hours a year of work productivity that's lost.
Good point. Try and keep our questions short, can focus, please.
Professor of Architecture and Urban Planning. I came here from the University of Washington to be dean of our college. While at UW as chair of architecture, by the way, it's the second largest research university in the country. We developed something called TransitOriented Development with a partner named Peter Calthorpe, who got a half page yesterday in the New York Times. And he points out that the problem, electric cars are great, although we learned at a conference here on Friday that it'll take a long time to penetrate. But more importantly, autonomous vehicles are actually a nightmare scenario, because it's not a question of what's propelling the car or whether it's automated. It's how many people are in the car. And the single occupancy vehicle is still the big problem. I don't care how light the cars are and how smart the traffic lights are. There aren't people in the vehicles. So he's proposed automated vehicles that are only carrying groups between transit-oriented developments, TODs. And in fact, autonomous vehicles will increase the number of vehicle miles traveled, increase carbon footprints. Thank you. That was for the governor.
Okay.
That's a long discussion, but if you're proposing that we should prohibit autonomous vehicles for single occupancy vehicles, I believe that's a bridge too far, politically if nothing else. But I believe your central premise that we have to have a transit-oriented development, which we're doing big time, quite successfully in the state of Washington. I'm very proud of our growth management and our public transportation sectors of focusing on public transportation, which is inherently green. We're doing that in our transportation infrastructure plan. I'm proud that the state, with the greatest percentage per capita of electric buses in the United States is Washington, a little town called Wenatchee, Washington. We're doing a lot of those great things. But I agree with your central premise, tactics maybe not totally.
I think it was maybe President Obama that tried to suggest that, fixing the climate change problem, transforming our energy system was our generation's moonshot, right? And I was really surprised that that argument didn't resonate more with people, or at least not that I could see, because I think it really speaks to the way we like to think of ourselves as Americans, as can-do people, as problem solvers, as people who excel. So my question is, why do you think that argument didn't resonate, and what arguments do you think can work to get us all to collectively move?
Right, I can take this one. So this is something I think a lot about being in business school, and they preach this thing of the triple bottom line, people, profit, planet, how you have to almost make arguments on all of these different fronts. So you have to make a business case for something, you have to make an environmental case and a social case, like job creation, in the case of new energy technologies. But I think there's a troubling thing that happens when you make a business argument for this stuff, and that when you only act because something is profitable, I think we have to ask ourselves, is that really something that we expect of moral agents? When you're only doing something because there's a gun to your head, or because you're going to make a lot of money doing it, well, as soon as that's not the case, you're just going to stop doing that. And so we do want it to be empathy driven. We do want there to be an ethical component to this that makes it such that as long as we have the resources to do it and it won't cause comparable harm elsewhere, we do it. And so that's that's the conflict I've experienced advocating for the power purchase agreement for U of M, because it will, because I got up there, I made this whole financial argument, presenting financial models and so forth. But what I really care about is fighting climate change. And so it was tough. And I think what it comes down to is that, at least in the case of the students, it's like we have a well-defined system of values. We know something we want, and so we have a playbook. When we talk to these people, we use the financial argument. When we talk to these people, we use the environmental argument. And we're not lying. We're not making up the numbers, or I would never do that. But I think what it comes down to is you just have to know yourself, know your own values, and know your audience, and talk to them appropriately.
Can I add something to that?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I want to add something. The question was, why has this argument not worked? And I believe the major reason is because nobody's made it. In the last 3 cycles of our presidential races, the entire time dedicated to climate change was about 42 seconds. We need to have leaders who will make this argument. And when you ask people to run for office, you got to force them to make an argument on this and require them to make an argument. In 2020, this nation needs someone to make this argument that this can-do society is going to do what we did when we went to the moon. And I believe that's possible.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's you.
Hi, my name is Hudson Villeneuve. I'm an organizer with Next Gen America, and I think any topic discussion about climate change needs to mention environmental racism and the disproportionate impact of climate change on minority groups. I don't think any of us in this room would believe that the Flint water crisis would happen in a city like Ann Arbor, and that the reason Flint doesn't have clean drinking water 4 years later, I think we all know that reason. So I was wondering if someone could talk about that impact and what's being done to address that.
So how do we, go ahead, Chris.
I mean, obviously, there's a lot to that question, and speaking only with respect to the city of Ann Arbor, I guess we have a couple of points of interface. But the first and primary is, what we do as a municipal organization is we provide affordable housing and so we need to make sure that our affordable housing units are themselves energy efficient, and as we move forward, that they move to net zero. We have over the past couple of years, made sure that we've invested millions of dollars in improving what we have as public housing and affordability, climate resiliency, flooding protection. These things have been crucial as we go forward. Also, I mentioned flooding. With respect to the city of Ann Arbor, flooding and precipitation is probably the most direct and already existing impact of climate change. Over the past 40 years or so, each and every year, Ann Arbor now receives about 40 Michigan stadiums filled with water extra every year on account of climate change. That's the change that has occurred within the city of Ann Arbor. And that results in flooding throughout neighborhoods. But it will not come as a shock to you to learn that many of our neighborhoods that are lower income were built back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, perhaps without the stormwater infrastructure that they ought to have had. And so what we need to do as we move forward is, well, first make sure that our going forward systems are in place and well designed and planned. Make sure that our public housing is well designed and as affordable as it is also resilient. But as we devise what we're doing going forward with respect to stormwater infrastructure, that we make sure that we have an emphasis on making sure that what we do includes equity analysis whenever we decide what projects to work on and where. And it does.
May I add quickly to this?
Sure, Lisa.
I think that in addition to everything that Mayor Taylor just outlined, I think one of the fundamental things we absolutely have to do is begin working together. And that means starting where the people of Flint are or the people of Detroit are. And one of the things that is very clear right now in the state of Michigan is that we have a drinking water crisis that is about not only clean, safe water, it's about affordable water. And in places like Flint and Detroit, the water is not affordable. So if we can build bridges and start really where the people of Detroit and Flint and Benton Harbor and you name it are in terms of what is plaguing them in their everyday lives. It's us. It's all of us. If we can work together on issues that matter every single day, then we can expand out to make sure that the right voices are at the right tables when decisions are made about what kind of policies should be adopted at the city level, at the state level, and at the federal level.
Yeah, on that, I've noticed moving from Tucson that it's raining more here. But more seriously, I've also noticed that these problems that you're talking about aren't just in Detroit and Flint and Benton Harbor. They're all over the place. And with this PFAS thing that's erupting, and I wonder, I don't know, Guy, this is getting a little out of your space or not, but I know you served the governor on environmental justice. How do we work across the state to ensure that everybody who has these water challenges can see the reason to work together to solve them? Or is it true we all have to work together?
Well, I'll start at the back and say, yes, it is true. Actually, DWJ, Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice, is working across the state for the first time this past year or so in Grand Rapids, more recently in Flint, partly because we recognize the need to spread information and share our experience over the last couple of decades, but also the term values just keeps coming up. Right? One of our values is to go where we're asked to go. And we were asked to help in Grand Rapids because there's vapor intrusion, where you've got poisonous fumes coming up from underground pollution and forcing evacuations of people. And that took us into conversations of how can people organize locally. And to your point about environmental racism and other forms, it goes back to the principles of environmental justice I mentioned. We have to have well-rounded conversations where people of all perspectives are in the decision-making conversation, and that the racial makeup is more balanced. That is just not happening typically as a normal course. But to your question of working across the state, I feel that the possibility there is, regardless of party, we now are surfacing to a greater extent the depth of problems facing us as a state around environment, around things we take for granted like breathing and drinking. So it's getting to be a little bit easier to at least convene people to start the conversation and to interject what are the true impacts and what do we know. And that's something that DWJ is really trying to step up and play a role statewide for the first time. Also because of the practicality of the need for state policies to shift. If we want better conditions in Detroit, we're going to have a smarter and more proactive legislature, which is made up of people from all over the state. We need our colleagues to vote for smarter, more proactive representatives. So we're trying to convene and be participating in these types of conversations more aggressively.
Thank you. You know, I think we have time for just one more question. And how about, yeah, one, you've had your hand up for a long time. Yeah, you. Thank you.
Hi, thanks all for being here. My name is Jenny Rogers, and I volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby. And for Governor Inslee, do you think that passing a statewide carbon tax will help push for federal legislation to address it?
Well, I think that states are called the laboratories of democracy for a reason, because they work. That's how virtually every progress we made nationally has first been done in the states. That includes marriage equality, it includes women's rights of choice, it requires the minimum wage. I mean, it's just a tradition of how America makes progress. So yes, I think it will. By the way, this is not a done deal. The voters are going to vote on this. It's not a done deal at all at the moment. But yes, and it depends how this experience goes. Now, if this had terrible ramifications after 5 years, it may not. But I don't believe that would be the case. Because what we have found in the history of the environmental movement in the last 4 decades has been an extremely consistent one, which is that every time we have taken a step to give Americans cleaner water and cleaner air, they have simultaneously got a better economy. And we have shown a direct linkage between improving your environment and producing a better economy. As a result, we have had both cleaner air and cleaner economy. And I believe that this is the same situation in our effort to defeat climate change. In early 1970, when I was a student at the University of Washington, sitting where Grant's sitting, and you look down towards Mount Rainier in August from the campus of the University of Washington, you couldn't see it. Mount Rainier was gone in the smog. But we took a step towards catalytic converters, and the geniuses here in Detroit helped invent that. And until our forest fires started to destroy the environment in the last 2 years, you couldn't see Mount Rainier again. Because the forest fires, which are accelerated by climate change, caused so much smoke in Seattle you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. We had to close our swimming pools because the air was so dirty it was unhealthy for kids to go swimming. So I think this is a back to the future. We know that when we do things in a rational way with thought, and you get cleaner air, good things happen to you, both in a health perspective and economic perspective. And I believe that's true. I think it's been true a little bit already in Washington State. We're the state that has some of, if not the best policies on clean energy, also has the best economy in the United States. We have shown that developing clean energy isn't bad for your economy, it's good for your economy. We've been rated the hottest economy 2 out of the last 3 years. We were called the best place to do business and the best place to work on the same year. That's a pretty good thing. And it's because we have recognized the importance of health and clean air and clean water. So yes, I would like to be a beacon of hope for the country, and we intend to do so. By the way, I want to give credit to Michigan alumni Gerald Ford, who was in a Republican administration that gave us those laws that I'm just talking about, who gave us the Environmental Protection Agency. It was a Republican graduate in an administration that gave us that, thanks to the Wolverines.
Go Blue. I'd like to end with anyone who wants to make a parting comment. We have 10 minutes left. I think Governor Inslee has just said we got to have hope, but he also said it's not a done deal. You know, and I think those of us who have been around a long time fighting the fight, you know, it's a bumpy road. There's a lot of moving forward, and there's a lot of moving backwards, and there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of excitement. What's your perspective on what's going to happen in the next few years? What's your parting comment for this crowd gathered today? And I'll give you last word if you want, or you can take the first word. You're our honored guest. Anyone else want to step in?
I think Grant should go first. He's a smart
Yeah. Put another way, are we going to save the world for Grant and his generation? Better damn well hope so.
Yeah, so I'm optimistic about this cause in particular, and there's a quote I think about a lot that civilization is in a constant rat race between education and catastrophe. And it seems that every generation faces some kind of horrible thing that's going to happen. I talked to my grandparents about the Cuban Missile Crisis and just how scared they were. And so it seems like, problem, it's getting worse, and then boom, we solve it somehow using some kind of technology. And going back to the Willow Run example, there's a professor here, Andy Hoffman, who shared a story with me about how bomber production was only going at the rate of one a month, I think it was. And then when they came to Willow Run, using their innovative techniques and Fordism, they were able to get that down to, 63 minutes per bomber. And so that's incredible. I also think about the smartphone example of how when I was in elementary school, no one had a smartphone. It was hardly even a concept yet. Now I would guarantee that over 95% of the people in this room have one. And so that makes me optimistic. Just the rapid exponential proliferation of technology that solves humanity's worst problems gives me optimism for this problem in particular. And we just need to work and actually make that technology, and then I think we'll be fine. But we still got to work for that. We can't just lay back. So I'm optimistic.
So I would say, as a university, I think we can leverage the creativity of our faculty and students, and then developing solutions that address the challenge of today and tomorrow. But we can also leverage the convening power of the university, that is to bring everyone together and then work together on solutions. So I think that's what the university can do and should do. Creativity, leverage, convening power, and so on.
So if I didn't have hope, I don't think I could go to work every day. And I have 2 boys, 21 and 18, and I have to look them in the eyes and tell them that their future is going to be okay. And it's going to be okay for a couple of reasons. Going back to the Willow Run plant, who built those bombers? It was women and African Americans coming up from the South for better lives. And I believe that women and minorities are turning out in huge numbers right now to say that what we've crafted in this country over these last couple of years, sorry to get political, is not okay. It's not the future that we want. It's not addressing climate change. In fact, we're actually turning back the clock. And people are also understanding, to the point that Governor Inslee made very clear, that states are the laboratories for our democracy, a democracy that is sometimes messy and hard and challenging, but it's what we have and it's what we own. And if we all actually participate, we can actually make this state, this country, and this world a much better place. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, so far. I want to reflect on a little history about policy, which I'm very encouraged to hear about the ballot initiative for carbon tax, because carbon tax is the strategy of choice by environmental justice activists for decades now. You might say we lost that foray at the federal level when the structures for carbon trading started to become more widespread and in practice. So arguably it's not working out that well, or we wouldn't still have the data I mentioned earlier about health and air quality here. So I'm hopeful too. And from a practical perspective, bringing in the cost of the behavior is really crucial. We've got to harness the economics of the damage and put it where it belongs. So the carbon tax is the way to go.
I'd like to echo what a couple of other folks here have said with respect to obviously the need to vote, but the need to vote mindfully with, and focusing on this issue. Collaboration and convincing of existing people is obviously something that should be striven for. But there's nothing that achieves the goal better than electing someone who already shares your goal. And that, I think, is a crucial element. Taking it a little bit again, more tactically, as I think befits someone in my role, in Ann Arbor, we have, I think, we have a common commitment to the problem. I think that the fear that was identified, and I think is absolutely true and reflected of where we are on a larger level, isn't really present here in the city. I think for the most part, people are convinced that there is a problem. Where we get hung up often is on resources. And, we have a very limited set of resources here in the city, and we have a set of needs that exceed those resources. And so what we need to do is, take, both paths. We need, I believe, to increase the resources that we here have on the municipal level. That is through our own actions and through working with people at the state. But then also we need to make sure that elected officials, myself and my colleagues on city council included, that the allocation of those resources to this problem is a community priority. We have resolutions, we have plans, we have commitments, but those commitments don't achieve anything if in the next budget the money which is allocated or designated or conceived of or planned to achieve climate action within the city, if those monies are used elsewhere for some other very important good. So nevertheless, we need to expand resources, allocate resources, and internally take action.
So in May of either 1939 or 1940, when Winston Churchill became the prime minister, you'd had this unbelievable series of defeats by the British forces at the hand of the fascists. And the British military was absolutely in pieces, and Dunkirk was shortly to be forthcoming. And people went to Churchill and said, look how dark the hour is, and we're going to just have to reach some deal with Germany. This is just unsustainable. And we need to consider that option. And Churchill said, that's just not right. Victory is the only option. There is no other option, because without victory, there is not survival. There is no other option than victory in this battle. Therefore, we're going to have victory. It's really, really simple. And we got Wolverines and Huskies working together, too. So it's going to work out, like Grant said.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you all for coming, and especially to Governor Inslee and Trudy Inslee and their team for coming together and being the nucleus of this convening. Let's see if we can take it forward. Thank you.